Welcome to Leaders and Legends, the podcast focused on leadership and clinical trial execution. I'm your host, Patty Lushton, CEO of Diligent Pharma. In each episode, we'll get to know the individuals who are driving change and influencing the direction of our industry. Whether you're a seasoned executive yourself, an emerging leader, or simply passionate about clinical trials like I am, join us as we discuss our industry's most pressing challenges, the future of clinical trials, and hear insights and advice from the leaders who are moving our industry forward. Jill, welcome to Leaders and Legends.
Happy to be here.
You know, you are our very first guest who is not in the clinical trial space, and I just really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. I really believe that it's important to learn from leaders who have had success in other realms. And so today we're going to be talking about your world of movie making and comparing and contrasting that to entrepreneurship and business building. And I guess, for our listeners, I'll just say you're a documentary filmmaker, you're an award-winning director and producer. I'd like to start with you just sharing a little bit about your professional journey and how you got into the entertainment business.
Okay, so I went to film school, but it was a long time ago, and it was Ohio University. They had a fantastic film school, and I was the only woman in the film school, which was fun. And my plan was to go to graduate school, so I had gotten into both USC and London Film School, and I very much wanted to go to London Film School, but I had to, after school, make some money to get myself there. And I went to New York because I'm from New Jersey, went back to live with my parents in New Jersey. And my mom was a working mom, worked in New York. So I got a job in New York at Madison Square Garden Productions as a secretary to the director of productions, these two big honchos, right? And I worked for the guy who did everything that's in the garden, all the productions in the garden. So I met, people in the rock and roll business and, dog shows, cat shows, everything. And I became friendly with a guy who was the tour manager and lighting director for the Rolling Stones. And he knew I was a young filmmaker and that I needed a place to edit my film, my student film at night, my thesis film. And he said, I'm very friendly with these documentarians, the Maysles Brothers, who did Grey Gardens and lots of other films that they're noted for. And he said, they'd like to help young filmmakers. Why don't I give them a call? So he did. Then I called them, and they let me use their editing rooms at night. And I became friendly and developed relationships with everyone there, and they ended up hiring me. So I ended up not going to graduate school. And I started my professional career with this team, the Maysles Brothers, who trained me. First, thought I wanted to do camera work, so I did some of that. I was an assistant camera, for Al Maysles on a couple of things, and then I decided I didn't want to do that, so they trained me as an editor. And there I worked with some of the greatest people in the business.
Wow!
So I started there. Then I went on to get opportunities at public television in New York, which is WNET, that station. And I worked there I hooked up with a producer there who gave me enormous opportunities. And I started as a film editor and I became his producer on many things for over 10 years at that station in New York. And that was the beginning.
Yeah. That's amazing. It sounds like you got like a great break by being in the right place at the right time, meeting the right people who were willing to help. I think when you sort of look at the whole trajectory of your career, when you think about how it started, I think, that's pretty amazing. I want to come back to that, but, I'd like to just start by talking about some of the parallels between making movies, documentaries, building businesses. And in my mind, both really start with an idea, a creative vision. right? Um, could you talk a little bit about how you go from an idea to bringing that to fruition? You know, just the initial steps um, of getting a production off the ground.
Well, you know, it can start anywhere. It can start from a line in a book. It can start with an image you see. It can start with a book or a person that you think is incredibly interesting, which has been the case in my life a lot. I do a lot of biopic stuff. And, you know, from there, it depends what you're doing. So, it, you know, like when I was working for public television, the funding was there. So,
Mm,
but when I was doing my own film, I had independent funding. So there's a difference. I don't know which you want me to veer towards, the independent side or the, you know, kind of television or streaming broadcast side. Because they're different in that, well, from the financing side for sure, but the creative is similar.
yeah. Well, when I think about, you know, entrepreneurs who are getting a business off the ground, funding is a big deal. You know,
Right.
every founder has to figure that out. With my first business, I bootstrapped it, but, you know, the early weeks and months and years were very challenging. You know, now I'm in a different situation. We are, you know, a VC backed, tech enabled service company. It's a little bit different, but if you could talk about that funding piece and what that whole dynamic is like in the movie world.
Well, there are many tiers of that, as you can
Mm-hmm.
imagine. So if you're, you know, talking about, if we're talking about the documentary realm, you know, I'll just use a recent example of my own film that's out now called And Now Love. And there were two investors who gave money to a foundation that funded the film. And once that happened, you know, I had an idea. I had a vision for what this would be that I pitched to the investors and to the subject of the documentary. And they liked the way I was going to go about it. So from that standpoint,
Mm,
once I pitched to them and we talked about potential numbers involved in what the budget would look like, and they said, great, you know, when I went and did a budget, presented the budget, they were good with the budget, and we went on from there. And in terms of, you know, you might think they in this particular case, it's a little different than, you know, typical entrepreneurship businesses because they weren't really looking for ROI, and that's different.
yes.
When you don't have that, which I know you do in the VC world big time, um, it's a little different. So, not to say that there aren't creative differences or whatever things that might happen in a business situation. In my situation, you know, everything's contract bound. So I had right to the final cut of the film, and the subject of the documentary had consultation rights.
Hmm.
And you know, there's a few times when we mostly were on the same page, but there were a few times where we came to a situation where, you know, I had to make the decision to either go with that note or not, you know, go with that particular note or
Yeah.
not. And I felt that it just wasn't going to fit the film. It was going to take it in a different direction. So I, you know, had to say, you know, that's how I felt it should go. And
It sounds like you had creative control of
yeah, I
your
did. Hmm.
documentary. You
Hmm.
had investors, backers, but they were not sort of directing you in terms of how things should unfold. Is that
No, I was
accurate?
extremely fortunate because, like, like good executives, they hire a person because they know that person will bring something to the table that other people won't, or they're going to execute a story that's been told a million times in a different way, and
Mm.
they're going to notch it up. So they were incredible in terms of, you know, I showed them an outline, but other than that, they, who knows how that outline was going to go, because from script or outline, things change. And especially in a
Yeah.
documentary where you are following people, you don't know what's going to
Right.
happen. And
Yeah.
that's the exciting part, but it's also the part that's difficult, because it's hard to make people sometimes who financing something understand that kind of thing. Like when you're doing
Hmm.
something that has an observational documentary component to it. Mine wasn't all that. It had interviews as well. But if you are doing that, let's take a film like American Symphony, which was all observational documentary, that can take a long time. And, the budget, it's the thing everyone says, it always costs more and takes more time. And that's probably true in every business.
Hmm.
But, if you've got
Yes.
to be on a production schedule because they're going to air something in a certain time, then you've got to really put all the forces behind you. And you start hiring other editors, and, you've just got to crunch things down.
Right.
So,
So it sounds like there was an incredible amount of trust, right? That the individuals who you were working with understood that you had the vision, the capability to create something great. So they weren't going to mess with that. Is that?
no, no, very much so.
Yeah.
There was trust and love. I mean, there was a lot of,
Yeah.
they were just different than a lot of people you meet in the arena. And I was incredibly, fortunate and grateful. It was just pretty much a little
Yeah.
miracle that came my way, and I was fortunate.
Yeah. Well, I want to compare and contrast that to
Yeah.
maybe a different situation of a movie that's backed by a big, studio. But what comes to mind before we get into that is that I
Mhm.
think it's sometimes the concern of entrepreneurs and founders that as soon as they take money, forget it. Then their vision goes out the window. They're going to have, investors breathing down their back. To be honest, with my first business, that's why I just did everything on my own. And it wasn't easy, but I did it. And I will say that now with this business, I'm finding a similar thing that I'm working with financial partners that trust me and that are wonderful to work with and are also very helpful in terms of strategic input and connections and advice. That was sort of an eye opener, a lesson learned for me. But I certainly have plenty of friends and colleagues who do not have that situation, that are working with, PE firms that are really just focused on ROI, not necessarily always understanding the sort of the way the business is evolving and some of the business dynamics. And have you sort of been in a situation where that is the case, where there's just a very tight focus on the finances? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Um, yeah, because most situations are like that. And certainly when I was working with the studios, I would see that happen all the time, in terms of making a production schedule, because now they have to, they've got to change the release schedule. And this is when it was more movie bound and not streamers. But in the theatrical
Right.
realm, that was a big thing. Oh my God, we can't go out this weekend because a competitive film is coming out the same weekend. We need to back it up. So then suddenly you are in that position of, you got to make this happen, and I
Mm.
wasn't the one necessarily making it happen. It was on the team of it, but that just comes down, and boy, then the pressure is really on. You've got these big companies, as you know, who, have to please your investors, and you got to, when a film rolls out, that first weekend is enormously stressful. Back then, before streaming and things pivoted so radically in the past 15 years. But then, I was privy to a lot of that. And I don't think I was on one film that something like that didn't happen. Or even
Right.
an example of way back when I was working on a film, Trading Places, and with Eddie Murphy and Dan
Eddie
Aykroyd and
Murphy,
Jamie Lee
right,
Curtis,
yeah.
early on. And that film just went like gangbusters. That production schedule was just completely crushed, but it turned out great. But again,
Mhm.
studio has to make, they've got to make their dates.
Right, and well, what is that dynamic like, sort of the clash between the creative individuals who have an idea that they wanna, see come to life versus
Yeah.
the studio, whatever you call them, the studio,
The studio heads.
suits?
Yeah, the suits, it's
Yeah.
intense, but, let's say someone like Christopher Nolan, you know, uh, who's brilliant on The Dark Knight. I mean, he has creative control over everything. So I think even though things may get tense, he still pretty
He
much
does his thing.
has the last word.
Yeah,
Other people
yeah.
maybe not quite as lucky. I've
Mhm.
seen situations just get so tense, and that just dribbles down into all the people who are working on the film who, I was one of those good people. But,
Yeah.
from every aspect of it, from the production team, the post-production team, through marketing and publicity, because everyone then has to get on this, you know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, when I think about just in the business world and some of the tension that I've noticed with some of, friends and colleagues who are in the situation where they feel like they don't have maybe as much control anymore. I think what it comes down to, it feels like there's almost like a misunderstanding around what's really, really important. And sometimes there's also a lack of information around the sort of the dynamics that are sort of creating whatever is happening. If there's a delay or if there's sort of some speed bumps, it's typically not because people are asleep at the wheel. Markets change and things happen. You lose a big client for reasons that are beyond your control. But sometimes there's just it's not like digging into those details of the why and then the good communication and collaboration around, hey, let's work together to get through it. Is that sort of a similar thing where, the
Absolutely.
studios, they're all about ROI. They
Yeah.
gotta, get their movie out, right?
Deliver me the product, and it's very much what you say, because on the business side and the executive, I'm not talking about the creative executives necessarily, but they don't understand what it takes in the creative process to get through this. The speed, the bumps that you go along the way, and if you have a lot of special effects, that takes a much longer time, and to ramp that up is going to cost a lot more money. And it's things
Yeah.
like that they don't understand. Like the business side will say, well, why does it take this long to edit a film? Well, it's not just editing a film. There are so many components involved. There's, some green screens and, all kinds of digital things going on that to
Yeah.
make the film work. And like you say, I mean, that's very similar. There's just a kind of a lack of understanding of what it
Hmm.
takes to get there, and then the creative process, which is, as I've said, it's not a quantitative thing. So you have a business, you're trying to make a business quantitative with elements that are not, that are not, no, it's a creative thing, Oh, you
Yeah.
may get an idea the next day that'll change everything, and that'll make the film so much better. But
Yeah.
it's hard to, hard to get that across sometimes.
Well, in one of our discussions, I remember you saying that movie making is this creative world where decisions are made based on hunches and intuition, right? And that's somewhat at odds with the spreadsheets, the goals, the business plans, this, uh, the metrics, right? But that's sort of important, right? For business owners as well, too, to tap into your intuition and to move forward with creativity. So it really is a balance.
It's very much so a balance. And like you said, I mean, it's the creativity side is just it's just so much sometimes at odds with you know,
Yeah.
the other side. I was, yeah, I was just saying I was screening the other night, um, where the director was talking about, oh, he had started the film because he had seen a marriage scene at the Trevi Fountain in Italy or something. And he said, I
Oh,
want to put that in. Oh, that's got to be in my film. So you didn't know in the beginning that maybe that would happen, but it ended up
right.
happening. So it's things like
Interesting.
you get a hunch or an intuition that this is going to make the scene.
Yeah.
We got to shoot
Yeah.
it there, and
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 that's
it was
how,
great.
right. And that's how some businesses start. I mean, I've talked on this podcast about how I just had a flash of insight. I was out for a run and I when I left for that run, I had no idea about what I was going to do next with my career. When by the time I came back, I had it all sort of in my mind's eye. So, um, I want to talk a little bit about your documentary And Now Love. I saw it over Memorial Day, which was a great time to watch that film. And I was kind of sort of watching the film through these two lenses because it was so enjoyable and artistic and just the story is very compelling. But knowing you, I was also thinking about just your process of actually bringing this work of art to life and just everything that went into it. And can you talk a little bit about sort of just what it takes to create something that is that beautiful, that successful, and then how does it feel when now it's out there and people are able to enjoy it?
Well, I'm going to say three words. It applies to me, but to everyone else in the creative field: passion, perseverance, and grit. And grit
Mm,
would encompass a bit of resilience as well. So,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, those three things, if you don't have those, it's going to be difficult. um, but, bringing that to life, I mean, how that started was I had read the memoir of this Dr. Bernard Bale, and I was so, mesmerized by it, by this man's
mm,
journey, that I just thought, oh my God, this has to be, it has to be a film. And but the interesting thing, the image that stuck in my mind, which is what basically pretty much sold the film on, was this image. He had been shot down by the Nazis, and he was in a German hospital being held, and German nurse kind of saved his life and kind of fell in love with him.
yes,
And it was the image of her coming in the dark room, from the into his room, and the blast of light coming in at night, of her walking in, because he didn't know when she walked into his room the first time whether she was going to give him a lethal injection or what. I mean, he
right,
was, you know, who
yes,
knew, and so that was really the image that stuck with me, and I knew that was the major, kind of this love through line, this emotional through line of the movie, that love conquers all during,
yeah,
times when you think you're going to die, let's say. And for him, and that's kind of what started the journey of it. And then in terms of bringing the team together, of course, I had outlined the film, what I thought was going to happen, and I had a pretty good outline of it, which I shared with the team, and everyone was kind of involved. But I didn't know at that time. I hadn't planned on going back to Germany to take him back to the room that he was incarcerated in 71 years
Mm,
before. And then that occurred to me as I was working through the storyline, developing the story for a few months, and they agreed to do that. And that was an additional thing we added on. But I think that was really what helped really make the film kind of the emotional journey that it
yeah.
was.
Yeah, it's very powerful. I want to hear a little bit about the aspects of bringing a team together.
Yeah.
For that film, I mean, I think with businesses, especially startups, the team is everything. Like you have to have very high talent, high quality, because there's not a lot of room for missteps or error. It's sort of like, especially when you're launching something new, you kind of have to hit it out of the park. Otherwise, people are like, you lose steam very quickly. Is that the same with movies? Like, is the team and the team culture sort of paramount to success, or can you sort of switch people in and out, kind of thing?
Well, it's paramount, really, especially in a film like this, which is, it's such a, kind of, if people couldn't buy into the storyline, that would be difficult. I mean, you don't have to believe his psychoanalytic theory necessarily, but he had such a journey being a lead radar navigator in World War
Yeah.
II and being shot down by the Nazis. And, you respond to the story. If you don't respond to the story, then it would be very hard to be on the team because of what it's going to take to get the thing done. But I had a wonderful line producer who handled all the kind of nuts and bolts of everything, of the the hiring of, helped with the hiring of the team and the budgeting and handling, the payments and all that kind of stuff. And it was really amazing. She just was so on board. So
Hmm.
that was the two of us, and then I was handling the writing, the directing, the producing, and I was the person who dealt with the financiers as well. So
And you were
you
doing
know,
some of the interviewing, right? I
yeah, I
thought
was
I heard
doing,
your voice in that,
yeah,
in the
I,
in the documentary.
I
Yeah.
was
So you were
doing
in it as well.
I was doing
Wow.
all the interviewing, yeah. So, but we brought on, I kind of go by this in hiring, and there's a chef I follow, Ina Garten, and she always says, you don't want to hire anyone you can't sit down and have a good meal with. So I always did the lunch test,
Ye- Yes, that's
so
great.
see how that
Yeah.
went.
Yeah.
So, my editor, who was really instrumental in bringing the story together, um, we had a great lunch together, and I knew, and it was interesting because I knew that he hadn't dealt with the amount of material that we were going to be bringing in because there was so much archival material from World War
Hmm.
II and everything
Yeah.
else. And he had done smaller, kind of smaller films, but he was a really good storyteller. So I just took a hunch, that this would be a good fit. It ended up being good. And I mean, I ended up
Yeah.
hiring another editor to work with him later, but it worked out well. But in terms of putting the team together, and then we had researchers, and then my daughter came on as a story editor. She had been in the legal field, so she knew how to do all this research,
Great.
and she had been, in depositions and all this stuff, but she really knew her way around that stuff. And so she was incredibly helpful and really good at it, and very good at kind of picking photographs and creative stuff as well. And
Yeah.
so that was something I didn't expect. And it was terrific. Um,
That's awesome. I've
yeah.
also had the experience of working with my family members, with my children, and over the years, and it's a great experience because they get to actually see firsthand the day to day of what we're working on, and the ups, the downs, and all the details of it. So it's very gratifying. So with teams that come together to create a film, with your film and with others that you've worked on, would you say that you start to form a particular culture? Because culture, that's been so front and center for me with my businesses, just being very, very intentional about having values-based businesses with a very intentional culture. But because of the nature of movies, you bring a group together and then everybody goes their separate ways. Is it the same or is that different? Is there a particular culture that is associated with different productions?
Yeah, I think there is, and it depends on who's doing the hiring. I was in control of the hiring, and I've worked on so many films where I had no control of the hiring. And you get a culture that was just, oh my God, just all over the map, and people kind of fighting and prima donnas, and I've just been in those situations too a lot where you just have how did this person get hired? It was and then it would be a revolving door of people in and out, in and out. And
I see.
you had
Yeah.
no kind of control over that in certain situations. And that was hard,
Yeah, so that likely does impact quality, impacts timelines, impacts
for sure.
just, morale, right? Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, interesting.
But I,
Um,
I was on when I was doing some work on a feature film years ago, I was on location, and it was a really great group of people all on board kind of thing. And there was one guy who just wasn't. And he was
hmm.
ridden out of town on a horse. And it was it was a Western we were doing. So it was just yeah, that person isn't gonna,
Yeah.
meld with this team. So
Well,
let's get him
one of the
out.
things that I've found with, with the companies that I've worked in and the ones that I've led and with friends' businesses, if you're very clear on your culture, it's sort of like the people who aren't a good fit, they kind of stick out like a sore thumb. So they sometimes
Right.
self-select, or it's really understandable to everybody then if they have to be ridden out on a horse, right?
Right.
So, yeah, so it's interesting. So I have so many questions. There's so many things I want to talk to you about, but I think one of the sort of dynamics with businesses is that you have to know how and when to pivot because things do change. So, and if you don't pivot quickly enough, or if you're not evolving based on your client's interests and needs, and you get stuck, it's kind of a road to nowhere, right? So it's almost, I see it as a core competency for business leaders, business owners to have that sort of flexibility without losing the through line, as you put it, the emotional through line
You're
in
right.
in the film. And I'm kind of asking the question in two ways. Within a production, have there been times when you have had to sort of say, wow, I thought this was one thing, but it's actually another thing, and we've got to make some changes? Is that a thing with movie making?
Oh
And then I
God,
want to
yeah, all
talk to
the
you about the
time.
bigger
Hmm.
picture of the
Hmm.
industry, but
Hmm.
talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that kind of stuff happens all the time. You think you're doing one thing, and then let's say I was doing something that was, I don't know, I pivoted from, it was just going to be like an audio commentary on a DVD or something. And I said, oh, wouldn't it be great if this was like a visual audio, visual commentary instead of just an audio
Mm,
commentary? And that
hmm.
just sort of everyone said, that sounds great. I don't think no one's done that before. So, that was a pivot. a small pivot, and that worked really well. But you'll be in a situation also where there's, you know, something like you want to shoot in a certain location, and let's
Hmm.
say it's the Trevi Fountain or whatever. You want to shoot there, and you know there's no way in hell that you're going to be able to shoot there. So you've got to make the shift and say, oh, well, maybe we can do something with a green screen or make it look like that. Or, there's lots of,
Yeah.
you bring your team
Yeah.
together and you say, oh, how can we do this? Which is great, which I love, or I was doing something with, for Disney, years ago, doing a Super Bowl commercial, and we hired Tony Hawk to be the guy and skateboard. And I said, well, why don't we
Yeah.
have him skateboard in an empty swimming pool and then have him do this thing he's never done before? And we hadn't thought of that in the beginning. And then we thought, oh, wouldn't that be great? And so we had to kind of pivot a lot and
Hmm.
make that work, which we did. And I'm not sure I'm answering that question that you're,
No, no, you are. I think
okay,
that
good.
the commonality is just being scrappy. Like when you,
Being scrappy,
yeah, when you,
yes.
yeah, when you know you have to pivot.
Right,
Sometimes you don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars or
right,
millions of dollars to be able to actually make that change. So
exactly.
it's how do you do it? And then it's
Yeah,
getting
like,
all your team together to work
exactly,
together to figure it out. And that's
exactly.
sort of the fun, right? The
It
fun
is the
part
fun.
of,
It's the fun
yeah,
because, remember in my film, I had to recreate the German hospital room because I was doing recreations, and I thought, well, how am I going to do
right.
this? And we
Yeah.
tried to do all kinds of different practical locations, and we scouted this and that. And we ended up, building it on a soundstage, and it ended up being the right thing to do. And and then we realized
Yeah.
we had built this wall and then we couldn't get it in the door. So we had to modify that. So there's just things that you got to scrap together.
Yeah. And
And
by the way, I loved the flashbacks because in your film, because I think
thank you.
sometimes when you see sort of you know, a documentary that has scenes from the past, sometimes they just don't land, right? Like they feel a little hokey, but with yours, it just was so beautiful. And
Thank you.
I know I'm going down a rabbit hole here, but is it partly because there was no dialogue? Is that
Oh,
part? Do
yeah.
you think that was part of the success of that? It was
Oh, yeah.
very there was tension. It was beautiful, but there was no spoken word, and yeah,
I had, that was the thing that I had decided in the beginning that I wasn't going to have any speaking parts because it was just going to be too hokey. And you wanted to let those visuals tell the story at a
uh-huh,
particular time in
yeah,
the story
okay,
when it was really
right,
mounting tension. So I felt
yes.
like I wanted it to be like kind of like a silent film.
Well, that it was a great choice.
Oh, thank
I
you.
think the other pivot is when with many pivots for the movie business with COVID, but then also
Yes.
with streaming and the industry dynamic changes. So that shifts a business. It happens in every business, and in the clinical trial space, innovation and use of technology and the companies that are innovation ready and can adopt and adapt are operating in a particular way, and those that are struggling are trying to catch up. And so, can you just kind of frame that a little bit in
Yeah.
terms of that bigger industry pivot that happened with streaming?
Absolutely. I can do it because I've lived through it. And, I could see from on the studio side, what happened, when Netflix started as just a DVD rental company, but
Yeah,
you could see it coming. I mean, they weren't just going to do that, right? So, the
yeah,
studios, because they're so big, I mean, it's really hard to have a behemoth pivot that quickly. Like if you're small and scrappy, you can
right.
pivot, But,
Yeah.
they saw all the changes coming, and I had been consulting inside and outside of, both Disney and Warner, and watching what was going on once these video on demand started happening.
Hmm.
And, then DVDs were going to go away. And then now Netflix is, becoming a big player, in original content. And they're killing everyone because they have the data and no one else has the
Oh,
eyeball data.
right. They
They
have the
they
right.
look
They
on
have
their
the
back end.
data.
They know exactly how many minutes you've watched of Ted Lasso or whatever. And
Oh, right.
the studios are
Yes.
still
Interesting.
testing. So it's like,
Uh-huh.
you're just testing, but they know I can make 4 more seasons of this because my fan base is what it is. And I don't have to have advertisers, by the way, and so the whole broadcast advertising business of television, everything else started to change. It's not gone completely, but
Yeah.
the shift is that boat has sailed. And, um, you know, and then all the other streamers coming into play that were, Hulu and Disney and, all that stuff. You got HBO Max and all that. But still, the winner, the winner is YouTube because they have more eyeballs than anyone, and they have changed
Mm,
so quickly and dramatically in the past couple of years. Now they have premium content. It's no longer an anathema to be on that platform because they've got a
right.
million fast channels, and there's subscription video on, the SVOD, the PVOD, the AVOD, advertising video on
Yeah.
demand. And now all the streamers are following that AVOD model, the advertising video on demand model, because that does well for them. So you think
Hmm.
you're leaving the broadcast advertising world, and now you are finding it on the streaming platforms, which has changed. It has changed the content because what was a renaissance that was happening with, content that, not content, I don't want to call it content, with material that was so unusual and breakout and everything, they're more fearful and less willing to do that.
Mm,
Because now they're in the advertising model, and advertisers, once, like you said, once you have a sponsor advertiser, you got to be
yeah.
careful. They've got specs that, you know,
Okay.
they don't
So then
want.
that has an impact on quality and
Totally.
originality and
Absolutely.
yeah, ripple
Absolutely.
effects, right?
It's a ripple
So,
effect. And so you'll
yeah.
see things are becoming more homogeneous, and not the,
Uh-huh.
that's not the way it was. So, I mean,
Yeah. Well,
eh,
pendulums tend to swing, back and forth. And I wonder if there's going to be, and maybe there is, more of a resurgence of indie films and sort of things that are, out of the ordinary. I mean, that's kind of what I'm drawn to. But yeah, it's every action has a reaction, right?
well, yeah, they call it the creator economy, which it is now. And I feel really actually happy for the younger people that are coming up now because they have
yeah,
this, it's a prosumer world. And I didn't have that growing up. You had to be a trust fund person to buy a 16 millimeter camera back then. So, but now
yeah,
they're making things all the time, and it's great. So they can
yeah,
be scrappy, and those are the companies that are really coming up now. I mean, what they call the creator
yes.
economy, and there's TikTok and Instagram and what else, so many influencers, but there's content that's being done, vertical videos that are stories now. And um, so there's a
I
lot
think
of opportunity.
yeah, and maybe a parallel is with how much things have changed with AI. It's actually
Very
enabling new
much.
businesses to pop up and ha- have uh, offerings that are of high value, where some of the larger companies are sort of still trying to get their heads around how to incorporate things like
Hmm.
AI in clinical trial execution, for
Right.
example. And there is a door that has opened for some of these smaller entrepreneurial, tech-savvy organizations.
Totally. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
about to take a course on AI filmmaking just to get my hands around it, because I'm using AI for, proposals and stuff. I mean, just as a tool,
Oh, yeah. Right.
and I'm sure everyone is, but so see what the possibilities are.
So, we're closing in on time here, Jill. When I asked you to describe sort of the emotional journey of the passion and the grit, it did kind of. I just spoke with a woman CEO, Erica Conroy, who used the exact same words. She's getting her business off the ground. It's a very personal business to her, and I think that is. I just wanted to highlight that again because it is a sort of a kind of it's foundational for individuals who are launching something that is deeply personal and having to sort of go through the normal ups and downs that you go through when you're starting a business or when you're
Right.
getting, your movie made. So I just wanted to highlight that. But I wanted to just ask you a question because this has come up with some of my interviews with women CEOs, women entrepreneurs. You started in the industry when it was male dominated, right? And can you talk about what that was like, just being a woman in a male dominated world?
Absolutely. Because I was coming from the 70s and 80s, and it was very, it was the casting couch, still, it was the casting couch era, even though we were in the middle of women's lib. So I have to say I can relate several stories, but one of which I remember I was interviewing at a commercial production house in New York, and I walked into a screening room, and I looked up, and there were three men in the booth looking down at me, and then two men in the interview with me, who actually told me that they don't hire women because they get their periods and are moody.
What?
Actually said that to me.
What? Oh
He
my
actually said that
gosh.
to me. And I remember then, going back to where I had been working with this team of the Maysles Brothers, and he said to me, "You don't want to work with these people." He said,
Yeah.
"You don't want to work with
Yeah.
these people." But that's one. And I have to say that almost every man that many men that I did work with tried to, wanted to,
Come on to you.
yeah, come on to me,
Yeah.
well,
Mm-hmm.
I would say a good number. And, you had to draw the line.
Of
A lot of people
course.
didn't, but I did. And, because I knew if I did that, probably never work for that person again or whatever. You know what I mean? It's just,
Yeah.
plus it wasn't my thing. So, even though it was like free, it was the area of liberation and free sex and everything. And if you read
Yeah.
Sheila Nevin's biography, it's hilarious. And she was a big, big time head of HBO documentaries. One of the few very powerful women.
Yeah.
But it was funny in the documentary world. I had great women mentors and men mentors in New York. But when I switched to LA to get into feature films, it was a different story. They didn't want to hear anything. It was like women were like their apprentices and that's it. Or,
Mm.
women do marketing and PR, which was a
It
thing.
sounds worse than I thought it was, actually. I'm
Mhm.
wondering, has it improved?
Yeah, it definitely has improved because one, there are HR departments now. And
Yes, okay.
yeah, this was before HR. And, Gina Davis, the actress, has an institute called the Gina Davis Institute for Equitable representation. And she's started that in 2004. And so she tracks all the data on this. So you can look at her site. It's amazing.
Wow.
And
Okay.
I've been a member of it over the years, and she tracks all that data. And she says there has been some improvement, but not the improvement that we think, And I belong to a female directors organization called Film Fatales, and they track this as well. And, while there has been some, growth in that area, it's not as much as one expects. I mean, it's still, it's just the same kind of guys run the town,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Jill, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. I could keep talking and talking to you.
Sure.
So interesting. And
Well, we can
I
have
was
offline.
you will definitely. But I was thinking about, one of the differences in my world versus your world is that, like, I'm going to our big industry conference next week, the DIA meeting. I'm not going to be running into celebrities or, it's not like, I'll see George Clooney at the coffee break, right? So big difference there. But
I work in a sexy business. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, it's a media celebrity driven business. There's nothing that's, it's gossip. It's, nothing can happen on a set that doesn't show up in Variety the next day. It's just, it's a sexy business. What are you going to say?
Yeah. Yeah. Do we work in a sexy business? Probably not, but I think the one similarity is that we do have superstars in our business, and the superstars are the patients that participate in clinical trials, the researchers, and so we certainly have our celebrities, so to speak. But well, Jill, thanks again. It was great talking with you.
Thank you. My pleasure.